This year is the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington. We can all recall the famous words of Martin Luther King, the dream of children playing together, being judged solely on the content of their character. Right before he spoke, Rabbi Joachim Prince spoke. Prince had fled Nazi Germany. He saw the plight of African Americans and other minority groups in the context of his own experience under Hitler. Just a few weeks ago, at the 60th anniversary March on Washington, not a rabbi, but Sacha Baron Cohen, better known as Borat, spoke on behalf of the Jewish people. He shared how he was able to get an entire bar in Arizona to sing "Throw the Jew Down the Well," which he said showed their indifference to anti-Semitism. But, he said, when I tried to film that exact same scene at a bar in Nashville, something different happened. People started to boo, and then they chased me right out of the bar. He ended by saying we always have a choice. Today, as others spread lies, we choose truth. As others stoke conspiracies, we choose facts. As others fuel hate and division, we choose empathy and the unity that allows us to make progress together for equality, for decency, and for democracy, especially here in the US&A. As many of you know, I grew up in Fort Wayne, Indiana, the city of churches. There were churches on every corner. I knew being Jewish was rare, special, and unique. It was in second grade that one of my best friends explained to me that Jews killed Jesus, and that's why people don't like us. And while I don't remember ever learning about the Holocaust, it being something I always knew about, my grandfather sometimes wearing his uniform from Auschwitz to our Passover Seder, I remember being in sixth grade and reading Number the Stars and being shocked that my classmates had never heard of the Holocaust. In middle school, student council elections were held on Yom Kippur. We never had off for Jewish holidays, but I always brought a written note and was excused. I had friends who tried to convert me, who took me with them to church, but I never felt oppressed. I felt left out, especially when we were the only house with no Christmas lights. But otherwise, I felt accepted. That was until high school. That's when things got complicated. Before, I had been attending an inner-city magnet school that's focus was arts and multiculturalism. So being the only of a particular group, or one of a few, was common. But high school was different. People were sorted as if you were shopping at the grocery store. Preps over there, jocks over there, close to each other. Band kids on the left, theater kids on the right, black kids in the auxiliary gym hallway, and dirts, those kids who didn't fit the mold, mostly made up of punks, ravers, goths, and skaters, by the door. I didn't know where I fit. I went to math class, and we were asked to find partners. A guy asked me to work with him. I was so excited. I didn't know anyone, and I was already being included. Then one of his friends asked him why he didn't partner with him instead of me, and this guy said, "She's a Jew. They're all good with numbers." I was so shocked and offended, and I was a fiery person and slapped him on the arm and stormed away. Also, I'm really good at math. I was on the ciphering team, and it sucked that I totally fit his stereotype. It was at this school that I was first checked for horns, where I was asked out only to have a guy come to my house, see my mezuzah, ask what it was, and drive away. It was here I learned to recognize racial slurs, here where my locker was swastikaed. During my freshman year, my synagogue was also vandalized. Someone had driven donuts in the grass and spray painted a swastika on the building. American Jews account for 2.4% of the US population, but we are the victims of 63% of reported religiously motivated hate crimes, according to the FBI. I never reported anything. I never thought to. It was just the way it was. And I believed, even though I was young, that it was all done out of ignorance. I was one Jew in a school of 1,600. I was the anomaly. At first, I ditched any group that said anything racist or anti-Semitic. I went from the preps to the jocks, etc. I eventually ended up with the dirts. I realized that if I continued to reject anyone who said anything offensive, I was going to end up with no friends. And so I tried as much as I could to try and unravel people's ignorance and hatred, to ask them why they thought what they did, to remind myself of their humanity, to remember hatred is learned, which means you can unlearn it too. There was one night in particular that I'm thinking of. My friends were at a party. I remember walking up and seeing one of my new punk friends who I thought was so cool on the front porch. Her name was Kara. She was an artist with a shaved head and bangs. She wore all black and was even paler than I was. And there she was, surrounded by neo-Nazis. Suddenly, her hair was no longer cool. It was a statement of belonging. I cried, and I asked her how she could be with these people who hate me, who hate blacks, who idolize an ideology that murdered my family. That night was the end of our friendship. But my friend Lucas was there too. He came out of the house, put his arm around me, and told me to relax. I could have yelled at Lucas for being there too. In fact, I did yell at Lucas for being there too. But Lucas was curious. Why was I so upset? And he listened, and we left and hung out with other friends. Later in our friendship, he told me what he thought was a joke about how to fit 6 million Jews in a car. Not going to tell the punchline, but I will tell you that I again yelled at him. But again, he was curious. He said he thought friends should be able to tease one another, to make jokes about one another. And at 16, I explained to him that he could make fun of me, Rachel, make fun of my hair, my clothes, my choices. But making a joke out of the Holocaust is never funny. That my family had been slaughtered, that belittling genocide is dangerous. He proceeded to make fun of my clothes. The ADL found that the number of anti-Semitic incidents in the US increased by more than 35% last year. Anti-Semitic and white supremacist propaganda in the US also hit new levels. On Rosh Hashanah, 3 of my colleagues reported being swatted and having to evacuate the sanctuary. Over 20 more received bomb threats. Rabbis Matthew Gertz and Karen Perelman led services from the parking lot, refusing to let these acts of hate stop them from celebrating the Jewish New Year. Anti-Semitic hate crimes rose in New York, LA, and Chicago, home to the country's 3 largest Jewish populations. In Florida, we too have seen a rise in hate crimes, from graffiti found on the walls of Jewish neighborhoods in Weston, Ye was right, on court buildings, to shootings, bomb threats, vandalism, flyers, and more. We have spilled so much ink trying to explain the why of anti-Semitism. People cannot wrap their minds around the idea that hate of Jews could have lasted so long and be so universally prevalent for no reason. We find ourselves having to give an entire history of Jew hatred, maybe one that goes back to Pharaoh in Egypt, who planted the idea of a 5th column, a people who don't assimilate, who are secretly loyal to something other than the country they currently live in. We then go on to talk about how it evolved through early Christianity, who, in order to differentiate themselves, eventually marked us as Christ killers. We talk about the blood libels, expulsions, the book burnings, the forced conversions. Eventually, we get to the protocols of the elders of Zion, eugenics, Nazi propaganda, and then the Nazi final solution to the Jewish question. That is a lot to cover when someone asks why and is expecting an answer that could be a Twitter post that wraps it all up in a nice, neat bow. And it's also not helpful. While it's important to know about the history and evolution of anti-Semitism, it doesn't always help us to know what to do right now that will be helpful in stopping it. So that's what I'm going to attempt to do, not just give you a sermon about how bad it is. You can read the federal government's reports on religiously motivated hate crimes for that. But try and give you a new way to talk about anti-Semitism that is helpful. Journalist Barry Weiss has helped to sound the alarm. Deborah Lipstadt, the U.S. Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, has written beautiful books on how to recognize and call out anti-Semitism and is actively working on fighting anti-Semitism around the world. What I will share is informed by them, as well as Sharon Goldsvik, founder and CEO of Uprise, a person who works as a social justice advocate and communications strategist. There is a lot to cover. If you're interested in helping, we have an entire committee of the temple dedicated to this work, dismantling anti-Semitism. It's called Unbiased. Today, I'm going to focus just on how we talk about anti-Semitism. I did a quick Google search to see how my colleagues talk about it. In his High Holiday sermon, Rabbi Stephen Moskowitz said, "It will always be here. It morphs, metastasizes." Rabbi Amiel Hirsch said, "Out-of-control Jew hatred metastasizes online." He said, "The explosion of anti-Semitism awakens in me a dire, depressing, demoralizing dread." This year, I also talked of anti-Semitism as rearing its ugly head. Notice how we all have disembodied anti-Semitism, as if it is not attached to an actor, but something that in and of itself has agency. Anti-Semitism is spreading as if by itself. It's metastasizing. It rears its head. It found a home on the far left and is working on the far right. So it has a head and a home and a job. It has always existed and always will. And if it's an inevitable part of nature, something we cannot rid the world of, it implies, why even try? We also tend to describe anti-Semitism as a binary personality trait, meaning that a person either is or is not an anti-Semite. The problem with that is that if a person can think of an individual Jew who they don't hate, or maybe who is part of their family, then they must not hate Jews, and therefore cannot possibly be an anti-Semite. So anything I did that was offensive isn't a problem, as the term anti-Semite clearly doesn't apply to me. It's very difficult for us to believe we can solve a problem if we don't believe that we as humans have caused the problem. It also gives cover to people that think that we think are responsible for anti-Semitism when we refer to it as an agency in and of itself. In her research, Goldsvik found that we tend to use two kinds of metaphors when we talk about anti-Semitism. The first is a water metaphor. The water metaphor sounds like anti-Semitism comes in waves, or anti-Semitism in America ebbs and flows, or now we're experiencing a wave of violent anti-Semitism. Sometimes we say something like anti-Semitism is the water we swim in, or we have to push back against the rising tide of anti-Semitism. This reinforces the story that anti-Semitism is a part of nature. It's eternal. It can rise, it can fall, but it's always going to be there. When we use water metaphors, it's like we're saying we cannot imagine a world without anti-Semitism because we can't imagine a world without water. And that is terrifying. No wonder we're scared. We don't accept that we can stop a problem that we as humans didn't create. If it is indiscriminate, anybody can get caught up in a wave. Anybody can drown in the water. It doesn't serve anybody's purpose. It just is. The second metaphor that we rely on is that of a virus. The person is a virulent anti-Semite, or anti-Semitism has infected the world. Anti-Semitism is spreading, or anti-Semitism has different mutations. This virus metaphor suggests again that anti-Semitism is natural and not caused by people. Anybody can be infected, anybody can spread it. This reinforces the idea that a person is infected by it or they're not. It's about what's inside of them or inside of their hearts. And again, it doesn't serve anybody's political purpose. These metaphors teach us that if anti-Semitism is not a problem created by people, and we don't really believe that people can solve it, and it's indiscriminate, meaning anybody can fall prey to it, then there's nothing, again, that we can do. Pretty hopeless, but also incorrect. Experts on anti-Semitism suggest we use a different metaphor, a machinery metaphor. This says that anti-Semitism is part of the machinery of division and fear created and used for specific political or material gain. Throughout history, there have been several instances where governments or political leaders have used Jews as scapegoats to divert attention from their own failings or to promote their own agenda. In Imperial Russia, much of the Russian leaders blamed Jews for causing food shortages and price inflation, for spreading rumors about the lack of weapons, despite it being one of the most widely known public secrets. During the resulting pogroms, over 250,000 Jews were murdered by mobs. During the Spanish Inquisition, Jews who had converted to Christianity were targeted as a way for the monarchy to consolidate power. Stalin used anti-Semitic campaigns as a means of diverting attention from domestic problems and as a way to discredit his opponents. The point being that anti-Semitism is a tool used by those in power or those who want power to wield power. As opposed to our unhelpful virus and water metaphors, the machine metaphor suggests that anti-Semitism is something that was built by people and is used by people for specific purposes. This is accurate. It's the people who built it and who operate it, who are responsible for it, and they're the ones who are benefiting from it while others are hurt by it. While we can't imagine a world without water or how to fight a virus, we can absolutely imagine that there is no particular reason for any piece of machinery to exist in the world. That means we as humans can stop anti-Semitism, shut it down, dismantle it, or throw a wrench in it. We can also say that the machinery of anti-Semitism is a part of a larger whole. It's part of the machinery of division and fear. Now we have a different character that's responsible for anti-Semitism, all those who derive their power from division and fear. We still have Jewish people as targets, but there are also other groups that are targeted by an array of connected machinery, and that's an important part of our story as well. Those people who are operating the machinery gain political or material power when we are divided against each other. It looks like manufacturing fear, blaming Jews for problems, violent acts, and also targeting other groups of people on the basis of race or religion or other aspects of identity. We can say, politicians who rely on division and fear for their power use anti-Semitism. It is no longer the subject, it is no longer the agent, it is now the object. Instead of saying this person is an anti-Semite, again, in our sort of binary personality trait kind of way, we might say this person is using anti-Semitism to generate fear and divide us against each other. This attaches purpose to it. It's not about rational fear and hatred, it's about a purpose. I am so grateful for this tool of language. I hope if you get anything from listening to me for so long, thank you, that you use the language of machinery when you talk about anti-Semitism. I wish I had this language as a teen, trying to navigate the world. But I did understand even then that good people could say and do anti-Semitic things, that they could learn and change. Lucas remains a lifelong friend. He came to visit me in college and one night told me that he had been drinking with some friends in high school. They had driven donuts in some grass, and then they realized they were in front of the synagogue. One of them had spray paint in the car, and when he realized where they were, he jumped out and painted a swastika. They had all laughed and drove off. Lucas told me that he could see how he would have kept going down that road if it wasn't for our friendship. He thanked me. I am grateful to him. He taught me at a young age that people are not anti-Semites or not, that we are not infected with an incurable disease, that we can stop anti-Semitism, we can dismantle anti-Semitism, and that's what we are going to do right now. Gemar Chatzima Tova.